Thank you again for allowing me to interview you.
Yeah, no problem.
So tell me a little bit about what you're currently doing now.
Okay, so I am doing a bunch of things. I'm working at Legacy Theater in Brantford, Connecticut, stage managing A Christmas Carol, which is actually a remount. They did A Christmas Carol last year. It's a new theater.
Hmm.
They just opened in 2021, I believe. And they did A Christmas Carol last year, and it's a new musical production that they wrote. Um, and uh, and so they're remounting it, and this is the first time they've ever remounted anything. They basically do newer shows or
Hmm.
new productions of shows, but they're remounting this, so they already have the set, they already have everything. Um, they have basically a lighting design. They're
Hmm.
making a few changes and additions to things, but the set's already there. We're rehearsing on the set, so that's really cool. Um, and apart from that, I'm also managing editor for Daily Star Trek News. So I do that. I do a little bit with that sort of every day. And I write for Sherlock Holmes magazine, which is a quarterly magazine. Um, so once every 3 months, I write one or two stories that go into that magazine and get published. So.
Now, how did you come about these job opportunities?
So the I'm a stage manager by profession. I have been
Mhm.
for 30 years. So the legacy job, I have been working at Nantucket in Nantucket at the White Heron Theater Company for about the past 5 years as their resident stage manager. So at the end of the season this year, they said we don't think we're doing a Christmas Carol this year. We've done
Mhm.
a Nantucket Christmas Carol every year for the past 4 years, and they said we don't think we're doing it this year. So don't turn down any work for the Christmas season because we don't think we're doing it. So I didn't. I actively sought work. I sent my resume to places, including this Legacy Theater. I sent my resume after a, a friend of mine who I've worked with before
Mhm.
was like, I'd love to bring you in. He helped sort of start this theater. His name is Jamie Burnett. And he brought in all the equipment. He's the lighting designer, so he brought in all the lighting and the snow machine and everything that the theater owns, all the technical stuff the theater owns. He pretty much found and brought in. Um, and he knew they have a stage manager, but she was looking to move more into the production management side.
Mhm.
So he said, "Would you send me your resume? And because I'd love to get you involved in this theater and as the stage manager." So I sent him my resume, and it all worked out great. They liked me, I liked them. It's a sweet little theater, um, and they put on good productions. And so they hired me. And the day after I signed the contract, White Heron Theater Company on Nantucket got back to me and said, "Oh, we're doing the show after all." And I was like, "Well, not with me, you're not." um, so that's how I wound up working for Legacy. In terms of Sherlock Holmes magazine and Daily Star Trek News, I back in it was sort of April or May of 2021.
Mhm.
Um, I sent Daily Star Trek News was a podcast I listened to. So they said, we're looking for somebody to write trivia and history. And that was going to be, they were strictly a podcast at that point with, every once in a while they put something on their website, but the
Mhm.
main thrust was they were a podcast that came out Monday through Friday, about anything having to do with Star Trek, specifically breaking news and new kinds of news and stuff like that. Um, so they were looking for somebody to write their trivia and history. Up to that point, their creator Alison Pitt had written it all, um, and she had done everything, and she had just hired a couple of writers. But she wanted somebody that could take over. It was sort of taking over her life, and she had a day
Mhm.
job as well. So she was looking for people to audition to write to write trivia and history. And so I auditioned, and everybody that auditioned had their day in the sun. They got a week um, of the trivia and history articles. We each wrote one history article and then a trivia. The way she did it was there was a trivia question on Tuesday and a
Hmm.
trivia answer on Friday. So we each got a week. We got to do these 3 days of trivia and history, and she liked what I did, so she brought me on board. And I'm very technologically savvy and very interested in technological stuff and find it very intuitive.
Hmm.
So eventually, she offered me the opportunity to come on board and learn how to update the website and how to post articles and how to do a little bit more technologically. So I did that for a while, and ultimately, I also wound up every once in a while writing some news stories. Um, and so I continued with the trivia, the history, the news stories. It became less of a podcast and more of an online news source. We did a podcast about once a week by the end. And then in May, this past May, uh, Allison approached me and said, I've been doing this for 3 years. I'm tired. She has a family. She's like, it's taking over my life, and
Hmm.
it's not kind of hitting me in the same way that it used to. Would you like to take over and become the managing editor? And I thought about it because I don't like to jump into something like this, just without thinking about it.
Hmm.
Um, and I was like, you know what? I don't know why I'm spending so many brain cells thinking about this. Of course I'm going to do it. So I agreed to do it, and I've been the managing editor there for 6 months, and that's been really fun. At the same time that I auditioned for the trivia and history articles, um, I had been receiving Sherlock Holmes magazine, which is a quarterly magazine, comes out of the UK. Um, I'd been reading that for a few issues. It was pretty new. It was less than a year old, and I knew there was a place called Gillette Castle, which is here in Connecticut, um, and it was built by William Gillette, who created the role of Sherlock Holmes for the stage. He actually
Oh
got in
wow.
touch with Arthur Conan Doyle and said, I'd love to do this." And he's a fascinating theatrical character, and this ties back into my interest in theater and theater history. Um, so I've been there multiple times, but I wanted to do a tour of it, like a photographic tour of it.
Hmm.
So I just got in touch with Sherlock Holmes magazine. Adrian Brady is the editor, and pitched the idea, and he said, "I think that's a great idea." So I got permission to get a tour. They still weren't open from the pandemic yet, but I
Hmm.
got permission to come in, um, and have a personal tour with one of their guides, and also talk to. There's a couple that play William Gillette and his wife um, at the castle and answer questions and stuff. And they dress up. He dresses up in the full
Oh.
Shakespeare Sherlock Holmes garb and all that. It's really cool, and they're really really nice people. And so I got an interview with them. So I wrote a separate article for that. So I was in two, and I sent them both in. They were
Hmm.
approved. They wound up in the magazine, one in the summer of 2021, one in the autumn of 2021.
Hmm.
Um, and I've been writing for them ever since. And I have at least one article in Sherlock Holmes magazine a month or a quarter now.
Hmm.
Sometimes two. I occasionally will have two articles that I do. So it keeps me busy. And it's a lot of fun, and I've always loved to write. So it sort of hits that sweet spot as well.
It sounds like it's been an not so much interesting, but just great overall experience for you. And then I
It
can
really has.
hear by like your tone of voice how enthusiastic you are about it.
It really has. There are things that I'm interested in as well.
Hmm.
It's not just I love the writing, and I love the fact that I get to write, not for a living. I don't get paid enough to call it a living, but
Hmm.
I love that I get to write and put that out there. now, and it's you know it and I've always been a Sherlock Holmes fan. I've been a Sherlock Holmes fan since my mother sent me a collection of Sherlock Holmes stories when I was at camp when I was 10.
Hmm.
And I've been a Star Trek fan just about as long, and now I get to actually write about it and talk to people about it and geek out about it.
It's
So
like a
it's,
full like
cool.
360 for you.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly. So, and it's a great way to come out of the pandemic, because I was working during the pandemic. Excuse me, I was one of the fortunate ones. I actually had a job during the pandemic. I worked at Best Buy, which was great. And I love technology
Hmm.
and I like people. But it's, I wasn't really super happy at the store. It was a retail job and it was great to be working. And, I still have friends that I worked with there, and so that was terrific. It wasn't a job that really hit me.
Hmm.
And then to come out of that and come out of the pandemic and go into doing this kind of thing is just, icing on the cake. It's great.
Yeah, it's like you're waiting for your right moment because you're not getting the itch that you want, and then boom, it's like just hits you.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, going off of technology for a bit,
Yeah.
or equipment, what do you use when it comes to production or editing?
I mean, for Sherlock Holmes magazine, I'm just writing, so I just use the word processor.
Hmm.
For Daily Star Trek News, when I took over as managing editor, I was like, well, I'm not going to do the podcast. I'm not. I'm just not interested in. I like to write. I'm not interested in doing the video and the podcasting and that kind of thing. Um, but it's funny how things work because I suddenly started getting interviews and haven't stopped getting interviews. So the podcast lives. It doesn't live in the same way Allison had it, but it continues on. It's mostly an interview show now, and we
Hmm.
we do the news mostly online, and then we have a YouTube channel and a podcast. And the YouTube channel has, of course, the video of a Zoom call with whoever I'm interviewing, and the podcast is just the audio of that. I don't do any special podcast. I just take the audio of that video and put it on there. Um, I have a Mac computer. Uh, every every couple of weeks, I find something new. I started just by using Zoom and recording
Hmm.
Zoom. Um, and I have graduated from that to recording Zoom, but then using iMovie,
Hmm.
so that I can get some close-ups of people, so that I'm not always on the screen, or Zoom isn't deciding. There's a way you can set up Zoom so that it flips between people, and that I tried that once and it wasn't a great experience. The interview was great, but Zoom just didn't do what I needed it to do. So I taught myself how to use iMovie
Hmm.
to get what I need. Um, Graduating from that, I uh, have recently discovered something called Hit Film, which is a free film editor. You
Hmm.
can pay for for more stuff, but all I need to use is the free stuff. Um, and I've also learned how to with Zoom. You can record separate track for each person. So I can, there was a time when I was doing interviews
Hmm.
and I would laugh at an unfortunate moment or something, and it would obscure what somebody was saying. Well, now I learned just recently how to edit out my voice if I don't
Hmm.
want to hear me and just want to hear the person speaking. So I'm doing that, and then I can also import into Hit Film and do different transitions, more transitions than you can do in iMovie. iMovie is sort of like the basic thing. Hit Film, I'm just learning, so I still
Hmm.
use iMovie for the basics, and then I move over to Hit Film if I want to do something more technologically challenging. Um, and so I use that those two programs as my basis. We record the podcasts, and then I put the podcast audio. I export the audio using iMovie.
Hmm.
And so I export one that's got both the audio, excuse me, audio and video. And then I also export just the audio. And I take that and I put it, there's something online called Libsyn, which
Hmm.
is a podcast hosting site. And so I put it up there. We're part of the Roddenberry Podcasting Network. So they have a podcatcher on their website that catches every time I load something and drop an episode, uh, their website catches it. And so you can find it on the Roddenberry Podcast Network. You can find it in Apple podcasts. You can find it pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can find it. So that's I use Libsyn to do that podcast hosting. I also use Squarespace.
Hmm.
That's our website. And I've gotten really proficient at Squarespace now. I still mess up sometimes. Sometimes it's a little tricky, but I've done a lot of it, a lot of Squarespace over the past year. So I've really gotten good at updating our website and such. And we use MailChimp. We have a daily newsletter that catches every article that we put out
Hmm.
per day, and they and the newsletter goes from MailChimp. So I use MailChimp a lot too.
There's always stuff to learn, which is incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I don't have a real microphone yet.
Hmm.
I want to up my game. I, I'm always the hardest judge of my work, but I do think that our podcast sound could be better. So I want to, I'm looking at investing in a microphone, and I've looked at a couple of different kinds of microphones to see what I think would be a good sort of starting microphone.
Hmm.
Now that apparently I'm doing podcasting, who knew? Um, I need to up that game a little bit. So that's the next step.
Now, talking about the step for you, what was it like working at the Lyric Stage Company of Boston?
I love Lyric Stage Company. I had never worked there before. I know people who have worked there. I'm kind of plugged in to the Boston theater scene because
Hmm.
I have worked in Boston before. I worked at Actors Shakespeare Project. I did a couple of shows there, and their people's names come up all the time of that I worked with there. Um, so I worked at Lyric back in the spring. I did A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, which is this hilarious murder mystery. It's not really a murder mystery. It's about a guy who's trying to murder all the heirs of a particular fortune
Hmm.
because if he murders enough of them, then he comes up ready due for the fortune, and it's very funny. We had a lot of issues. Now, I love that theater company. And it was not at all the theater company's fault that we had issues. For one thing, the um, the script, The Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder,
Hmm.
at the time, it was 10 years ago, maybe, or something that it was on Broadway. Times have changed already in that 10 years. Um, there was a lot of racist stuff in one particular song in
Hmm.
particular that we weren't comfortable with. And so our musical director contacted the original writer and
Hmm.
asked if he'd write a new version of the song or a new version. It was just one verse that was
Hmm.
really really bad. Um, and he did, but it took him until like the day we opened,
Oh, wow.
or the day before we opened, before we got the new lyrics. And the new lyrics meant we had to do new choreography to it because they were different enough that the choreography we were doing just wasn't working.
Hmm.
Um, so that was one challenge. Another challenge is now in these post-COVID times, you have to have an understudy or
Hmm.
understudies for your leads. You also have to have swings. And so, what swings are, there's usually a male swing and a female swing. And what they do is they cover everybody else. If you've got a lead who's got an understudy, they don't cover them
Hmm.
necessarily, but they'll cover, you know, the third guy in the background or whatever, but they have to cover, they have, honestly, swings have the hardest job in theater. They have to cover everybody. They have to learn all the lines, all the lyrics, all the movements, everything, with minimal rehearsal. Um, and so during our tech week, which is the week
Mhm.
when you put the show together and put all the technical aspects in the show, it happens right before you open. Our lead got COVID, and the his understudy. We were like, well, we'll just put his understudy on the tomorrow, and then we'll open with his understudy. The next day, his understudy got COVID, so we wound up having to cancel the first 10 performances.
Wow.
Um, and then by the end of the run, almost everybody in the cast and crew had COVID. I didn't. There were a couple
Mhm.
of the people who didn't, but almost everybody else got COVID. The second to last week we had to cancel the full week, and the final week we made it through barely, but we had, I think it was a 10 or 11 person cast,
Mhm.
and we finished the show. We finished closing night with 6 people on stage. Two of them were the understudies, and two of them were the swings.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a challenging production. Working for the company was a delight, though. I would go back and work for them anytime. They're just they they make a habit of, and this is part of their ethos, of hiring the most delightful people, hiring people who aren't going to be an issue for the
Mhm.
theater. Because you can get your divas and you can get your people who are hard to work with, or people who think they deserve more than they can
Mhm.
get or whatever. They somehow manage, and there's always one in every cast, in every, and I've lucked out in recent years of not having that many. The cast I'm
Mhm.
working with now, everybody is delightful as well. There wasn't a single person on stage or off that was hard to work with or that thought they were better than everybody else. Not a single person who wouldn't pitch in. It was a delightful experience to work at Lyric. I would go back there in a heartbeat.
It definitely sounds like it was a good team, and as anyone would know in entertainment, that's what is required when you're
Right.
trying to get something done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about teamwork.
Mhm.
I've taught a few theater classes in my time, not not many. I had an after school program when I was 18, and during the pandemic, I hopped on Zoom with my niece once a week and did a theater class. That kind of thing. But number one thing I teach them is teamwork is everything. It's very much a team sport. And it doesn't matter if you're the usher bringing somebody to their seat or if you're the producer finding the money for the company. It's everybody's part of the team. And to have a good production, you all have to be working together.
Yes, indeed. I've definitely had my fair share of people that have been helpful, and then people that I've learned from.
Sure.
And in doing so, you kind of realize how fortunate you are when you have good staff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the key to success in just about anything. Theater obviously is a unique profession and it very much depends on teamwork, but you could look at any profession and be like,
Mhm.
everybody's important in some way. So, yeah.
Now, for you, what was the most proudest moment you've had professionally?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Um, I mean, I'm consistently proud of the work I do. There are
Mhm.
days when I'm like, yeah, I suck today. But I enjoy the work I do. I think I'm usually 92% of the time I think I'm good at it. Um I would say one in recent years that
Mhm.
I'm very proud of is I in Nantucket at White Heron Theater Company, we were doing a production of The Hound of the Baskervilles, which it was like manna from heaven for me getting to do a Sherlock Holmes show, because I'm so into Sherlock Holmes. And
Mhm.
it's one of those plays where it's 3 people who play all the roles. And it's done for comedy. but it's so technologically challenging. It is there's bodies that are falling from the ceiling, and there's things that are being brought on stage, um, either by a pulley or
Mhm.
by people moving them. There's quick changes all over the place. Like it is everybody, because it's three people playing 20 roles or 50 roles or whatever, however many it is. Um, so there's all kinds of things happening. In addition to which, there's sound cues happening,
Mhm.
and a lot of them, and a lot of lighting. So it was a lot. Um, and I happen to have three three crew members on that show, which is great, except none of them had done theater before. Two of them were in high school. One was like a freshman in college,
Mhm.
and they all came in. We were looking for run crew. They came in. None of them had ever done any theater before. Uh,
Oh.
so there was a huge learning curve. Aside from that, our sound designer had the sound design and sent it to us, but was unable to be on island for tech. So I had to, and we use something called QLab
Mhm.
for, which is basically you can run sound, and now you can run projections from it. And it's a great program, but you want to spend a little time with it before you work with it. I
Mhm.
didn't have the time to spend, so we went into tech, and I basically had to teach myself how to run QLab during tech rehearsal, which tech rehearsal is a 12-hour day with a 2-hour break in the middle. Um, and so it's a long day, and it can go to the next day,
Mhm.
too. It's not necessarily just the one day, and it was my birthday. Um, and I taught myself how to use QLab and how to edit these cues and add cues and do all this stuff that I had never done before, while at the same time training these three people who had never done theater before. And it was exhausting. Um, I'm diabetic, and I had a little diabetic meltdown in the middle of the day because so much was going on. Um, and my body was just like, okay, you need to like stop for a second. Um, so it was a tough, and it was my birthday, and everybody saying happy birthday to me, which was nice. But I was also like, I don't really have time for you to sing happy birthday to me. I have a million things I have to do, or we're not going to have a show on Thursday. Um, so it was super challenging. But at the end of the day, looking back on it,
Mhm.
it was one of my favorite shows I've ever done. And it was also, I'm just super proud that we got it up. The three kids that were running the show, one of them used to want to be a writer and now wants to be a stage manager. And I've worked with her since, and she's great. And she's a delight. Um, and she was my ASM since then, for a couple of different shows. So, which is assistant stage manager. So I'm really proud of how that show turned out, and despite all the challenges, we all got through it. Without nobody lost any limbs, and it was a really, really good show. It was a really good seller, and it was a funny show, and it was looking back on it, I was like, okay, it nearly killed me, but it was a really good show, and I'm really proud of the work I did on that.
Which is always nice to, even though it could be stressful, and I'm sure it was at moments.
Sure. Yeah.
But it sounds like it was just a great experience to kind of be like, I was stressed a little bit, but I managed to get through it. And through that, I was able to give a good performance.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, the last question I have is, how do you stay calm during a project when things don't go planned?
Well, I have a lot of practice in that, um, because things in theater never go as planned.
Mhm.
You can have as many lists as you want. You can set up as many calendar thing items as you want, but I mean, both the stories I told, the one about the lyric and the one about Hound of the Baskervilles, things did not go as planned. Things never go as planned. So you have to say to yourself, we're just doing theater.
Mhm.
It's not like I'm not performing brain surgery. I'm not sending somebody to the moon. Lives don't depend on this. Um, it's just theater. So
Mhm.
yes, it is super stressful. And there have been days where in particular shows where I've been, maybe I need to leave theater now because I used to have hair and now I don't because it's so stressful. But but it it's something I love to do, and I I I just sort of go, even when I'm starting to feel the blood pressure rise.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm, as the stage manager, the one that's supposed to stay calm, the one that needs to keep everybody else calm and make everybody else. I'm the father. I have to make sure everybody else knows everything's going to be okay, even if I don't know that everything is going to be okay. Everybody else needs to understand that it's going to be okay. And
Mhm.
honestly, it always is, because it's theater. We're putting on productions, and often we're putting on productions that say something and are important and people need to hear. But at the end of the day, we're not saving a life. We're doing theater. The times I have always worried about in my career most are times when somebody might get hurt,
Mhm.
um, because of something I did or because of something I didn't do. So I've always been very careful about that. I don't want people getting hurt on my watch, and sometimes some of the set moves or whatnot can be a little tricky, and they could hit people.
Mhm.
And I haven't done any Broadway, but there are. I don't know if you heard the stories about Spider-Man the musical,
Mhm.
Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. That was a super dangerous. People wound up getting hurt badly, like hospital hurt, on that show. And I've always been sort of uber careful about that because I
Mhm.
don't want that to happen. And I don't tend to work on shows where people are going to become paraplegics because of something I did or didn't do. But but I do work on shows where there are things moving. Somebody could get hit by a door. Somebody,
Mhm.
that's being brought on. If I I didn't, or my ASMs didn't glow tape that step, somebody could fall down the stairs. So that's when I start to get a little bit more stressed, is when um people are in danger.
Mhm.
Um, but even then, I'm like, so we just have to make sure that they aren't in danger, and then it's fine. I've had actors break their ribs on stage in the middle of a performance. Not from anything anybody did. It was the
Mhm.
actor's own fault. And we had to stop the show and get him to a hospital, and then we kept going without him. But it was fine. So it's really, everybody else can get stressed and a little bit panicky. I can't afford to.
Mhm.
And I just tell myself, look, you missed a light cue. Somebody didn't get their spotlight. It's not the end of the world. It may feel like that at the time. We did a production of The Weir, which takes place in an Irish pub at White Heron a couple of years ago, and it was a difficult. It's a great show, and we had a great
Mhm.
cast, and it was a great production. But they actually have to pour beer while during the show, so we had this whole contraption set up to pour beer, and there was a keg underneath the bar, hidden underneath the bar, and when they pulled the whatever you call it, the
I love
lever
her.
to, yeah, to get the beer, there was a tube that it got sucked up through and then down and came into the poured into the glass. It was a clever design,
Mhm.
but it was hard to tell when the keg was empty. And more than once, we ran out of beer either in the middle of a performance or toward the beginning of the performance, because and that was in part my fault because I couldn't tell if the keg was full or not. It felt full to me at those times, but it was just hard to do.
Mhm.
The actors got stressed about it because the show relies on that keg of beer, you know, um, and I totally understand that. But you know, the system was difficult to work with. Couldn't couldn't know every time, and you just move on. And it only happened a couple of times.
Mhm.
But and you got to remember also when you're doing something like this, the audience doesn't know something's amiss. The audience can't tell unless it's something really bad.
Yeah.
The audience is seeing this for the first time. They don't know that an actor messed up a line or that I missed a light cue or that any of this happened unless somebody gets hurt, unless somebody
Mhm.
breaks their ribs, you know? Um, so so you just keep that all in mind. And when your pressure starts to rise, you just sort of think about it and are like, oh yeah, nobody except me knows that this is a problem. So and then you go on. Part of my job is troubleshooting, you know, and so you go ahead and you troubleshoot the problem, and either it works out or it doesn't. But then you
Mhm.
fix it for the next night. Do you? The nice thing about theater is you have a second chance. Um, in television, once it's printed, you don't have another chance to go back and. I mean, you can do reshoots and stuff, but it's
Mhm.
not as easy. With theater, you do it one night; it's ephemeral. That performance is gone forever. Um, Tonight's performance is also ephemeral, but it might be a great performance. It's will also be gone forever tomorrow,
Mhm.
but maybe you fixed the problem that there was last night. So you just have to keep it all in perspective.
And thank you very much for allowing me to interview you.
No problem. Thanks for asking. I had a great time, Joseph.
Ooh, hold on.